I hope you've returned refreshed, rejuvenated and recuperated from your lunch break. It's got a lovely active session now. A number of really interesting speakers for you this afternoon, and then followed by that a question and answer panel session as well. Just do the housekeeping bit. First of all, there are no fire alarms planned for this afternoon at all, so if the alarm does sound, please look for the green running men sign and take your nearest exit. Please remind everyone to turn down their mobile phones. Don't turn them off, just turn them down, because we'd love you to do the social media bit, lots of tweeting and that kind of good stuff. I think it's up on the screen somewhere, but it's, hashtag AllEnergy17. If you could show that within your tweet as well, would be wonderful. Also make sure that all the presentations, by the way, will be available on the website after the event. It takes about 2 weeks, apparently, because they have so many different sessions to load up there as well. And just to say, for the question and answer session, we'll have a couple of people here with microphones. So if you could state the name of your company and who you are, and then your question, please, if that's possible. Our first speaker is Professor Dylan Jones, and Dylan is Professor of Operational Research based at the Department of Mathematics at the University of Portsmouth. It's worth saying that his main area of expertise is the theory and application of decision problems with multiple objectives. He's applied operational research techniques to solve problems in various fields, including logistics and renewable energy. Ladies and gentlemen, Dylan Jones.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm here to talk about the results of a 4-year FP7 project funded by the European Union called Lean Wind, relating to the offshore wind sector. I am, as was introduced, from a Department of Mathematics, but before you get too alarmed, I am aware that it's just after lunch, so I won't be hitting you with any heavy mathematics, but what I will be trying to do is summarize the results that have been coming out of the project. We're about 3.5 years into the 4-year project. One of the speakers this morning talked about a possible gulf between the world of academia and the world of industry. I do have the benefit of, as an academic, of taking a step back and looking at it from a kind of neutral point of view, but hopefully at least some of the findings that we give should be relevant to you as an audience. I will point out that although I'm a representative of the Lean Wind project, as you can see from the title slide, it was a 31-partner project. Working in this particular work, you can see we have partners in Ireland, Norway, Spain, and various universities in the UK represented. Okay, our remit was the second point there. How can lean methodologies assist the offshore wind sector? I always get slightly worried when I hear terms like JIT or lean, worried about kind of direct transfer of concepts that were originally designed for Toyota or Ford cars into other sectors. But we're trying not to do that here. We're trying to take the concept of lean, that's why it's in inverted commas there, and look at how the various aspects of the offshore wind sector can be made more efficient. Again, efficient is a slightly loaded word, but if you take efficiency in its widest possible context. So you can see some of the areas that we looked at. We have various work packages on towers, foundations, and materials. The whole idea of novel vessels. What I've been involved in and going to talk about today is integrated logistics and supply chains. We also have some O&M planning and economic analysis. Now, obviously, you'd appreciate that all of these areas are interlinked and they can't be solved individually, so we do look at them as a whole, as well as breaking them down into the individual components. Particularly, we will see that logistics and supply chains are obviously interlinked with the way we schedule, route, and plan our operations and maintenance activities. In the end, the way that we looked at it as a kind of decomposition of a connected, integrated supply chain is basically by a geographical segment and via life cycle phase. So we're looking at everything that comes into prior to the port. I'm talking about the offshore wind support port here. So even though things might be transported, and in many ways ideally, by vessels before then, I'm talking about anything that happens prior to that final phase that it goes to the port. So we have some activities happening at the support port, and we have then the phase of taking things from the support port out to the wind farm site. If you look at it on the other dimension, we have the installation phase, the O&M phase, and possibly not talked about so much yet in offshore wind, at least in terms of modelling, the decommissioning phase. So if you can imagine, there's 9, possibly 10, because there's a couple of installation port models there, 9 mathematical simulation models that can arise and be linked. So we spent most of the time developing these models. But what might we need to do that could be optimized? If you think about the middle line, the ports, we need to lay out our ports as efficiently as possible. Here, we can learn from the container port industry, and because they have an extremely efficient system for laying out their ports. Of course, they're dealing with conveniently fairly light cuboid objects, so they've deliberately standardized their industry to make it efficient. But we can nevertheless learn about minimizing transportation within the ports, efficient systems, minimizing breakages, etc., by laying out the port well. AHP, by the way, stands for the Analytical Hierarchy Process, and one critical factor we found is choosing the correct port as your support port in offshore wind. That could be different for the installation phase, the O&M phase, and the decommissioning phase. That's one of the key cost drivers when we model it. Then there are various types of routing models. Again, there's a lot of research gone on into routing vehicles on land, but also vessel routing. So we can have a look at some modeling techniques for routing our components prior to port. These can be classic transportation models. They could be simulation type models. And once we've done that, we think about going out to the port site, and we are routing vessels. Now, the difference mainly between on land is, of course, the weather and the weather windows that can occur. So we are routing in relative uncertainty. If you think about a land base, a delivery company, again, they route because of congestion uncertainty, but there's different types of uncertainty that affect our vehicle routing. That will be true with the O&M phase 2, where it has to be combined with our scheduling and our maintenance planning activities. And then we've also, this is, of course, is hypothetical at the moment, we built a decommissioning planning model to try and estimate the costs of decommissioning and the ways that these offshore wind farms might be repowered and eventually decommissioned. As there has to be in their commissioning, there has to be a decommissioning plan. All of this we've worked on in a framework of designing a GIS integrated system to make it easy to use. So some of the early results that are coming out of it, what you can see there hopefully is some routing. We have looked at 5 European sites with different wind farm sites with different characteristics. This one you see there is the West Gabbard site. So we were looking, in this case, it's the installation phase, and it's the flow of materials through Harwich and Ostend and onto the site, and looking for efficient algorithms and efficient routing patterns. A lot of the components you see are actually starting from inland location, for better or for worse. And you see for this one, they tend to take a fairly direct path to the nearest port, thinking about avoiding congestion and the cost drivers, and then do the rest of their journey as much as possible by sea. Of course, you would say, well, this is dependent on the parameters that you put into the model. That's very true, but what is interesting is to see how the different routes vary as we vary the parameters. That was on a European scale. On a small scale, this is a proposed illustration of a port layout algorithm. So this is just suggesting various areas for storage of, and working on parts in a proposed wind farm site. The third one here, you may not be able to see these numbers. I did promise you no mathematics, but there are a few numbers here. This is what we call the analytical hierarchy process, and it's looking at classifying different experts' weightings and levels of importance when you're choosing an offshore port. So we have split into a network of physical characteristics, connectivity, and layout factors. So things like distance to key to road connections, potential for expansion, component layout areas, storage areas, etc. There's all a series of pairwise comparison questions that is answered by a set of 5 experts to come up with a ranking that we can then start to look at what are the best ports to be chosen for a given future wind farm site. Okay, so that was a very brief overview of the supply chain section of the Lean Wind project. Some thoughts that I would like to leave you with. Obviously, well, I would say this, wouldn't I? But being my job, I would say that there is a lot of decisions to be made, challenges. As we've heard, the cost of energy from the wind farms, offshore wind, has been dropping significantly in the past 5 years. We'd say that obviously that isn't just down to mathematical modelling, but it plays a part. But nevertheless, we do believe that there is further to go, or further potential. Getting good integration of the O&M scheduling, knowing when we should be doing our corrective and preventative maintenance and linking that into the routing of vessels. We're coming up with new sets of algorithm. As I told you, port choice and layout is of major importance. And my final, I guess, plea is that not to be tripped up at the end by increased decommissioning costs as what was expected in the plans. We are showing when we do the analysis that it's coming up slightly higher than currently predicted. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that, Dylan. Yeah, it's great to see, certainly in my neck of the woods in the east of England, I'm seeing a resurgence in Yarmouth, in Lowestoft and in Harwich of the ports there, which were somewhat downtrodden. And it's great to see some highly skilled jobs going into that area and arriving for the first time in a long number of years. So yeah, port choice is absolutely key. Okay, next up, ladies and gentlemen, delighted to welcome David Sweenie with us. David had to give me a little bit of a lesson on Gaelic just before we started there, because David is the offshore manager in Scotland for mainstream renewable power, and he's the project manager for, let's see if I get this right, David, Neart. close-ish apparently, for the Norton Aguirre project here. He's managed the development of the project for the last 7 years, would you believe? So he must have been about 15 when he started, I guess. During this time, he's received all the key consents for it, carried out comprehensive offshore surveys, selected its main contractors, and has now successfully attained the CFD for it. However, whilst the project is really ready to go now, it's currently delayed awaiting the outcome of a judicial review. But he's still ready and waiting and preparing for the next phase of it. Ladies and gentlemen, David Sweenie.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is David Sweenie, project manager for Norton Aguirre. Just looking out in the crowd here, and I don't seem to recognize too many people here, so thankfully someone, because I've done this for a good number of years now, at least someone new is listening to it. The others are probably bored, and they're in the exhibition space. I'm just going to quickly run through a couple of slides on Mainstream, just in case you don't know who they are. These slides, I'll rattle through these, and these slides are going to be available, as was mentioned. Mainstream are an independent pure-play renewable energy developer. Our focus over the last few years has started to change, and we're really focusing on emerging markets and onshore wind and solar. And we believe we're doing pretty well on that. We've got a proven track record in Canada, Chile, Ireland, South Africa, and the US. Not to say that we feel that we've been pretty successful in the offshore industry as well, but ultimately with the Hornsey zone and also with Norton Aguirre. We're only 140 employees, but within that we've got 600 years of industry experience, and we've got offices in 5 continents. We've got the Glasgow office, but unfortunately there's the other ones are Cape Town, Santiago, Chicago. So Glasgow's, that's where we live anyway. Quick map of where we are. So we've been pretty successful in both Chile and South Africa over the years, and obviously you can see in the highlights there where the other emerging markets that we're looking at. This, again, just another slide to show you where some of our big achievements have been. Focusing on, for my side of the business, being the offshore side of the business, Norton Aguirre. In 2009 is when we won the exclusivity, and in 2015 we won our CFD. Smart Wind down south was sold to Dong Energy, and Dong are doing very well with Hornsey 1 just now. I like this because these are corporate slides, and Scotland's at the top, but unfortunately that's because it was so long ago, and it's done in chronological order. We won in 2009 and 2015, just as I was saying there. What we do in Mainstream, really our business model is to take on development, to finance, and certainly in the onshore and solar business, is to build a large-scale wind and solar. In the offshore industry, and in certainly what we've shown with our transaction to Dong, we would develop the sites and then we sell on to big players. Ultimately, in this offshore industry, it's just, you're talking about huge sums of money that a small independent player probably can't sustain. Just these slides, again, it just highlights that we've only been going for under 10 years in Mainstream, but we've managed to attract over 360 million euros in equity and corporate fundraising. And in project level, we've attracted 1.3 billion euros into our projects worldwide. This does not include any of our offshore, and the reason I say this is that cumulatively that's over 1.6 billion euros of money that has been raised by Mainstream. We're going to need £2 billion to do Norton Aguirre, so you can just see how, even as successful as we've been over the years, it doesn't come close to comparison to Norton Aguirre. Just quickly on our values, these are important because we do a lot of partnering, we rely heavily on consultants, and when we're looking at supply chain, these are the values that we're looking for in our evaluation as well. Safety ultimately is our #1 priority. We always want someone on a Mainstream project to be going home safe at night. The remainder that we're really looking for and what we like in our partners is entrepreneurship, respect, sustainability, innovation, integrity, and working together. I'm almost finished with the corporate slides. Just wanted to highlight there, Rosie's actually gone. I only put these slides to embarrass Rosie, to be honest, for winning the Green Energy Awards, but she's actually back in the office. So, Neart na Gaoithe, this has been a bit of a journey. I've been on, as I said, been on the project for over 7 years. When I started the project, I wasn't even married, and now I've got a 5.5-year-old daughter asking why I do. So, by the time, hopefully, she doesn't hit double digits before this is built. Well, I presented this last year, and we were really building on the fact that we had the CFD was in our back pocket, but we were waiting on the excruciatingly long decision time for the judicial review. Unfortunately, that came out, and it went the other way, and that is currently in the appeal courts. What we have done in the last year is we did do a little bit of onshore construction over at Torness Nuclear Power Station. And there was an opportunity there. Scottish Power installing new cables. We got in there. We installed some ducting and handed the site back to Scottish Power. So it's just to save us in directional drilling when we get there. It's good to have gone into construction, ultimately. This slide, I hope everyone knew about this. Otherwise, I don't know why you're here. But that is ultimately everything I can actually say about the CFD, because it's all very confidential in the arbitration. I'll just focus in on the fact that it went in decision in NNG's favour. So we're off and running again. All this is available on our website, and obviously you've got the packs as well. That's all I can really say on that one. On the judicial review appeal, as I said, it went the other way, surprisingly. And we were in with the Scottish ministers and the other developers in February of this year, looking at the appeal. And that should hopefully come out in perhaps the next couple of weeks, but certainly the next month or two. Getting into the nitty-gritty of this, with the CFD arbitration win, we have a CFD, the project has a CFD, but we just have to have the route to build the project now. And what I've tried to do is, because we can't really pin down exactly what the schedule is just try and define a couple of scenarios. If the appeal goes in the Scottish Minister's favour and we're all off and running, then it's likely the financial close for this project will happen sometime next year. And that's the sort of timeline we're talking about. Onshore construction follows a year after. Offshore construction starts 2 years later. At the same time, onshore construction finishes. Third year, turbines go in and we're all generating and happy. If things don't go according to plan, then delays will get knocked on, and there'll be other routes that we have to look at to ensuring we have a consent for the project. Quick technical overview. I think I present this slide every year, and the number of turbines keeps going down. So that just shows you that as we're treading water, everyone else is making great successes. So up there, 64 turbines, that's essentially what we're consented for at the moment. It is likely to be lower than that, given the current market. More likely going to be at least up to 56 turbines, depending on what scenario happens. There's too many scenarios for me to try and explain to you all, and it would just be, I think a number of algorithms will be required to try and work out all those scenarios. So we just have to wait and see what happens in the next couple of months. Contracting overview. I presented this last year again. That is the standard that we're looking for in Neart na Gaoithe. 3 contracts: balance of plant, turbines, and electrical balance of plant. And those are the elements that fall under them. Now, we've been working with contractors over the years, and we're engaged with those contractors, but given the delay that we've had in the project, the technology advances that we've had in the project, we're taking an opportunity to challenge the market and challenge our contractors as to what the most optimized solution is for Neart na Gaoithe today. We also obviously have to be aware that other projects and markets are coming along. At this point, the German market will be coming along. And so there might be some constraints on delivery schedule, so we need to test the market to find out what can be done for Neart na Gaoithe. running out of time a little bit, so these slides, hopefully everyone knows. And jackets, offshore substations, cable installation, exactly, as written there. Onshore will be happening in parallel. Described that earlier on. There's some owner's responsibilities for the project. We won't be going contracting everything to EPC contractors. The O&M base will be with the owner, Neart. Environmental monitoring, the consent condition discharge, and health and safety marine logistics. And there are a lot of other aspects to the project as well. The supply chain database has been up and running for quite some time. It is still up and running, although it's been a bit quiet in the last year. Hopefully there'll be a bit of a resurgence again with people registering and organisations registering, so please take the opportunity to go to the database, and we're monitoring it, and we report on it on a periodically, on a quarterly basis. I'll leave you with that infographic. It's nice and colourful, the mainstream way. Just to highlight a couple of things, we target generation in 2021, caveat that, it really all depends on what happens in the coming months with judicial review, etc. £2 billion worth of investment, up to 56 turbines, could be lower than that even. Hundreds of jobs, it's going to be a great success story, because I think we can safely say it's not about if this gets built, it's when now. I keep on changing from when, if, and various other aspects, but I like to think it's now when this is going to be built. One little thing I didn't do, when we did this originally, we did some supply chain events. We'll be rerunning those possibly towards the end of this year, maybe into next year. We're partnering with Scottish Enterprise. Isla will be hopefully helping me on that, and we'll be engaging with BASE as well around about our supply chain plan. So I'll leave you with that. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much for that, David. That must be really frustrating with that judicial review that's going on there. So near and yet so far, I guess. Next up, you're really lucky north of the border, really, that you have Scottish Enterprise here. It's something that sadly, south of the border, I don't have that kind of level of support. And it's great to see that we have a couple of people from Scottish Enterprise with us this afternoon. Isla Robb is Offshore Wind Lead for Scottish Enterprise. And Isla is not only that, but she has a particular focus on supply chains, where her work includes introducing developers and key suppliers to the Scottish supply chain and supporting companies interested in entering the offshore wind sector. Originally trained as a building surveyor, Isla's had a varied career in the private and public sector, both in the UK and abroad, and she currently manages the offshore wind expert support within Scottish Enterprise. Isla Robb.
Hello. I'm going to talk to you today about why Scottish Enterprise supports companies in offshore wind and how Scottish Enterprise supports companies in offshore wind. Why? We are moving to a low-carbon energy economy, and with it, this brings many opportunities for our companies. Things are happening, and the figures are big. There are currently 5 active projects in the UK this year, with a combined capex spend of over £7 billion. Over the next 5 years in Europe, there'll be £60 billion worth of projects. Over the next 10 years, across the globe, there shall be £210 billion worth of projects. And there are 64 projects off to the coast of the UK in planning or consented currently. If a fraction of those companies if a fraction of those continue to development, it's still many opportunities for our companies. Scotland already has a number of successful companies winning business in offshore wind. Flowline specialists, Ecos Subsea, Fathom Systems, Subsea 7, Holder, Briggs, Babcock, etc., etc. We want to help them and other companies win business. As an example of this, I was at a Vattenfall event just yesterday, and the procurement officer said, and I quote, "Everything we need is in the UK. We just need companies to come to us." We want to assist companies with a presence in Scotland to win business. We have many ways of supporting companies. A few of these are SDI, Scottish Development International. With field staff and offices across the globe and in Scotland, they are ideally placed to help you truly internationalise your business. Offshore wind expert support, always. We have worked with 70 companies over the past 12 months. This comes in 2 phases and 2 types of support. The 2 phases, initially 2 days of fully funded support, and if more time is needed, you can have a further 4 days of support, which we fund 50% of. The 2 types of support, we can either look at the potential opportunities specific to your company and your skills and capabilities and how they are suitable in offshore wind, or a more technical or commercial due diligence review of a particular product or service that you offer, either currently in offshore wind or about to enter offshore wind. One example of our successful interactions was the company Sparrows, based up in Aberdeenshire. They manufacture cranes. They started with 2 days support, then took a further 4 days support. Approximately 5 months after this, they won a contract for East Anglia 1 to manufacture 103 cranes at a contract value of approximately £10 million, and they continue to win business. So to access that support, you can already be in offshore wind or looking to diversify into it. Other ways we support companies, we have a supply chain directory. We run many events, of which Dave's just mentioned. We look to raise awareness of opportunities for our companies, or more technical-based events that we will organise with others, or even just raising awareness of suitable events to companies that we work with. Innovation support. Innovation is key, and we have innovation specialists across the organisation, making your products and services and business models more innovative and advising you on the next steps to get them to market quicker. SMAS, Scottish Manufacturing Advisory Service. They're all about efficiencies and effectiveness, making your business more efficient. And you don't need to be a manufacturer, even though it's in their title. We have many other ways of supporting your business as well. Please come and talk to me or one of my colleagues at stand K10 today. And this time next year, I could be name-checking you as one of the major success stories of a business within Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Isla, and you lucky Scottish people and the support you get. Wish we had that south of the border as well. Next up, delighted to say we have Alan Duncan with us. Alan's one of the senior associates at BVG Associates. I had a look at his slides earlier on, and when I first spoke to Alan about this, I think he had about a 25-minute presentation. He's compressed that down now to about 12 minutes. So he's either going to speak really, really quickly, or I'm not sure, he's going to skip a few slides, I probably reckon. But Alan works predominantly within offshore wind, led a number of projects covering offshore wind supply chain opportunities, market entry and growth. He joined BVG from the Weir Group, where he was the global supply chain lead for proprietary material solutions. He gained experience in renewables at LM Wind Power, the blade manufacturer in Amsterdam, holding supply chain, global program management, and sourcing cost optimization roles. Ladies and gentlemen, Alan Duncan.
Okay, so I'll try not to speak too quickly, too fife, so you'll not understand what I'm saying. Okay, little very quick sales pitch first. BVG Associates, who we are, supporting the renewable sector, 10 years old this year. See a number of our clients there. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide because the boss isn't here, I don't think. Nope, so I'm going to skip on. So a lot, really what we look at is the kind of business side, economics, technology, and as I say, we've pretty much worked with everybody in the sector or looking to enter the sector. I'm going to skip through a couple of slides. The benefit of these ones are, it's probably been covered in other presentations, but if you're like me and come to these events and can't be bothered going to them all, there's something here for everyone, so you can say when you go back that you do know the size of the market, so I'll very quickly skim through these. So really a quick reminder, what is the demand? The demand we have is really for cost-effective alternatives to fossil fuels on a quick turnaround. I think that's the key thing we need to remember, is offshore wind is imminently very quick turnaround to put in. It's going to be a 65 gigawatt business globally within 10 years. So again, a lot of these slides you'll have seen. The UK, again, UK continues to lead the world. Bit of a dip in the middle there, as most of you will know, we've transitioned from previous funding mechanisms into the CFD, but we'll now start to see that come out again. And really, which I'll go on to the next slide, is the reason for this growth is the economics of this really are too compelling to ignore now. Again, you've probably seen these elsewhere. I'll just very quickly look at this. So the grey area being the kind of direction of travel, or the forecast direction of travel of the levelised cost of energy. As most of you will know, it's falling at pace, and some of the projects on the continent, as you can see at the bottom there, are pretty much ahead of the curve. You know, we have had to re-estimate, you know, less conservatively, because we are making a good fist of this. Where will the UK come in? We've got CFD2 going on at the moment. Where will it come in? I've put a rather large red circle in there to cover my bases. But I think significantly, very big deal for wind this year, I think would be coming in below Hinkley Point C, which, if those of you who aren't aware, is costing us £92.50 for 35 years. So again, that's a kind of target I think offshore wind will be looking at this year. And you heard it here first, I think we'll go below £90. So again, the direction of travel is pretty much set. It's very easy for consultants like me to stand up here and say, okay, or one of the first questions I get is, you know, with all this cost reduction, surely this is going to mean margin erosion, you know, it's going to be pushed down to the supply chain. So it really would be disingenuous for me to say that's not going to be the case. You know, so I think margin erosion is expected or will be required. But the main contributor, to put your minds at rest, to where this saving is coming from, as Dave mentioned a minute ago, is moving to larger turbines. So you can see at the top there, we think probably about 40% of cost can come out of wind until 2030. And as you can see by the big amber block at the top there, the vast majority of that will come from moving to larger turbines, as we've talked about. And again, you can evidence that. You know, you can look at pretty much the size of the turbines correlates almost exactly with the LCOE drop. So again, there is a big correlation, and that is where the majority of the cost is going to come down. One thing I did want to bring your attention to, because again, this is a supply chain event, you know, there are a number of other innovations required to do this. I've mentioned 43 there. So there's innovations right across the supply chain, and that's again where the supply chain is going to be required, because the developers and the tier ones are not going to make this happen themselves. So yeah, the top there, for the cultured people out there, Rogers and Hammerstein, how do we solve a problem like local content, I guess? And I think Dave will probably agree with me in saying this, is that, you know, although the UK leads the market, it cannot be local content at any cost. You know, there's a lot of strong competition out there that have been doing this for 10, 15 years. So again, if you're an oil and gas company or any kind of company looking to diversify, you need to be aware that you cannot just trade on the fact that you're from the UK. You are up against a strong competition, and again, the message I'd give you is be realistic. So this is some data that we've pulled on looking at the UK content on, I think it was 8 wind farms across 2009 to 2013. Where did the money actually go? So what you can see there, I guess, is, you know, totally we're round about 40, just about 40% of the local content is staying in the UK on these wind farms. In the development phase, development very, very small, but reasonable 57%. CapEx is where the problem is. So, as you would expect, we're just not making the bits here. This is the challenge we have and will continue to have in the UK. OPEX, again, I'm saying 73 there. So again, there is a massive push, you know, for OPEX locally. Logistically, it makes sense. So OPEX isn't the problem. Really, it's the CapEx phase is where we're struggling. So again, just looking at this on the kind of OPEX phase, you can see there from the outer, you know, a lot of UK benefit staying for UK wind farms staying in the UK. But for the CapEx phase, you know, we're getting a drop in the ocean, which is the problem. And again, looking at that a little bit further down, the one that strikes out you there is the turbine. You know, so being 39% of the CapEx cost, we're getting an absolute fraction of the turbine componentry made in the UK. So that is our biggest challenge at the moment. Balance of plant is improving. We're now starting to see foundations, cables, etc. in the UK, topsides for substations, so that will improve installation as well. Again, we can be quite bullish on, but it's this orange section that is a bit of a concern. So if you're assuming that at the moment the government's probably looking for about a 50% local content, that's probably how you would split it there, is realistically how the UK could get 50%. At the moment, the government's going through another industrial strategy. Do not be surprised that some of the rhetoric that comes out of that is pushing for a 70% local content in offshore wind. which would need us to do something like this. Again, all I'm saying is this word realism. You know, I know the Catapult had put out a report recently saying possibly 65%, but again, it's just very, very difficult for this orange section to be a compelling argument, and is going to kind of keep local content a little bit below. So I think 70% personally, I've got a very personal view at the moment, is a massive stretch. So again, it's just about being realistic. Bit of a busy slide, but again, I'm conscious that you're getting these away. So just to give you the bigger picture, so again, just a quick reminder where the money goes in offshore wind. So again, top left, if you're looking here, across a wind farm, that's what the developers generally is kind of spending, about 40% of it on actually financing, debt, etc. But the bit we're interested in is obviously procuring for the wind farm. In terms of how the money is spent, so you can see here, very, very big section at the start here. Obviously, around 60% of the capex is spent in a kind of 2-3 year part at the beginning, and then round about 40% on this kind of tail off for 25 years all the way out. So again, I'm not going to go through this this big wheel here, but again, you can see there very clearly, you know, on a standard wind farm, that's roughly where the money goes. So looking at it for your area of interest, you have a rough idea. So I've been doing a lot of work in this area in Scotland with SE, and again, thinking about oil and gas. We've identified what we say is 9 hotspots across those 33 sub-elements, and I'll touch on them very briefly. One thing to mention that we have looked at is rather just looking at where does it make sense. So we've looked at track record, you know, where have oil and gas companies made the leap, where does it make sense? Looking at synergy, where are there similarities in what you do in oil and gas with offshore wind? Appetite, again, there's no point in scoring that highly if Dave doesn't want more suppliers of widget A, again, there's no point in telling the supply chain it is required, so there's got to be appetite from the developers. LCOE potential stands to reason. The area you supply, if you can bring innovation and cost reduction, again, wind developers will be interested to speak to you. And again, I think the size and the investment required, and whether that's practicable in the time frames. So again, kind of looking across the wind farm, again, you can look at this at your leisure. But these are the 9 areas that really would show the highest potential, you know, from project management through array cables, substation structures, and I'll touch upon them in the next slide in a little bit more detail. The one I've highlighted at the bottom here is O&M. Again, I'll not be the first person to stand up and tell you O&M is the opportunity. If you bear in mind a couple of slides ago when I was saying it's about 90% is achievable in the OPEX phase, there's really going to be a massive, massive boom in the O&M spend in the coming years. So again, from a UK point of view, looking to diversify, O&M certainly is the area that I would say shows the most potential right now. So I think the message I'd like to give you again is, you know, if you are thinking about making a leap, really to learn from those that have gone before. You know, Isla talked about some companies there, so there are a lot of oil and gas companies have made the leap. I'm not going to go through all of these because that would bore you rigid. But again, please do take time to look at this. Some interesting messages in there. UK company TNAI have come over in project management. In array cables, this is probably one of the easiest areas to come over. Massive amount of synergy between the cables used in oil and gas versus offshore wind. And again, if you look at Techmar there, for example, one of the things they'd said is they were able to share best practice. So again, it's a message that I want to put over. You know, some areas that for betterment of both sectors. Again, there's good synergy for UK companies to get traction there. Substations, again, substations is part of the balance of plant. We see, we've talked about Babcock, for example, are now an offshore wind player. But again, a lot of good sub-supply opportunities in the substation for UK and oil and gas companies. Turbine foundations, again, is another area we're being quite bullish about. Global Energy Group are looking at that at the moment. And again, one of the things they're looking at, you know, moving from oil and gas to offshore wind, it's a difference in scale. In oil and gas, you're making 1s and 2s. You're making hundreds in this. So again, you've got to think about the manufacturability and what that's going to mean to your production flow, for example. I know Global Energy have had to do a lot of work on that. Secondary steel, so again, supplying into the turbine or into the substation. Again, a lot of good opportunities for UK companies there. Cable installation, again, is an eminently diversible area. So again, a lot of good activity from oil and gas coming over to offshore wind. Installation equipment, so again, not just thinking about the vessels, there's a lot of equipment on these carousels, tensioners, etc. A lot of deck equipment that again is, you know, shows good promise for companies looking to get into wind. Installation support services, companies like Foundation in Scotland do grouting services. Again, some good lessons learned from them. And as I talked about O&M, again, very, very good area for the UK. Second last slide, you'll be glad to hear. So I think the key message I want to give you is a bit of a delicate balancing act, and I've put the infographic up there, I've read between the lines. You know, Dave will not stand up here and talk about local content. Very much they're on the hook for what they'll call competition, innovation and skills. I guess the message I'm giving to you is read between the lines. You're not going to see local content anywhere, but thinking in that language of promoting competition, innovation and skills, that's what developers really are looking for. So I think messages for the supply chain, if you like, just giving you some thoughts to think about. Thing I say to companies, be realistic, assumptions on your return on investment against a backdrop of cost reduction. Again, I'm not saying you need to accept stuff for zero margin, but again, this is an industry you're approaching that is looking for cost reduction. So again, I think be realistic, certainly as you enter the sector or start a negotiation with a company. As I've talked about before, local presence does not give you the right to local supply. So again, I would urge you to think about the logic of supply. Some of the stuff Dylan talked about earlier, you know, the logistics of it. Why would this company come to me? So just thinking about that. Again, I would urge you to demonstrate learning and standardisation improvements in tenders and market propositions. So again, it is different than oil and gas. So if there is any kind of learning you have through your manufacture, try and think about feeding that into tenders or showing the benefit to developers as time progresses. I think a collaborative mindset, I would definitely urge. You know, it reduces interface risk. A lot of the financiers that are putting money into these wind farms are very risk averse. So again, more companies, new companies getting used is perceived as a risk. So again, think about collaborations, think about people that have a track record already that you can maybe get a subcontract opportunity with. Look international. Again, it's not the be-all and end-all here. And again, I would say trade your local presence for value proposition expansion. So again, companies are looking to get into the UK. Again, you can trade your local content if they maybe have a product range that you don't have. So again, thinking about collaborating in a wider group internationally. Again, I don't think you think about this as oil and gas or offshore wind. I think you need to think about this about marine energy solutions. A lot of countries approaching this, like Norway, for example, they don't talk about oil and gas and wind, they talk about marine energy solutions. So again, I think the UK needs to change that mindset a little bit. And again, I would say don't be intimidated by the developers. Dave's sitting there trying not to catch his eye. But don't, in all seriousness, don't be intimidated by developers. Developers are not the all-seeing oracle. You know, again, they need the supply chain's expertise to bring this cost down. So again, don't be intimidated. And the last thing I would say is, again, if you're in oil and gas, follow your existing oil and gas customers over. And the key thing is to demonstrate longevity. No, you're not here until oil and gas price picks up again. You're here for the next 20, 30 years. Again, this is a message you have got to get over to the developers. And if I can, a very quick message is to the developers and tier ones. Again, I think developers need to make it clear what's up for grabs and when. You know, make a shopping list, make it clear where you have shortages and where there's opportunities. I think also need to be sympathetic to multiple rounds of tendering. I think one thing you find in offshore wind, you're quite often asked to tender and re-tender. So again, developers need to be sympathetic to the cost and time that gives you as a supply chain. I think OPEX is a given, as I've talked about, but again, I'd urge developers to look at, you know, the UK's rich manufacturing history. And in spite of short political assurances, you know, I think developers need to try and give a bit of longevity to suppliers, you know, via frameworks, etc. So again, if the size of the prize is there for a longer period of time, it attracts the supply chain. I think the last thing I've said is be forgiving. What I mean by that is, you know, I think offshore wind has approached the oil and gas supply chain, me part of it, 5-6 years ago, and we kind of turned our nose up at it because the sun was on our back and we were making hay. The world has changed a little bit, so again, I'm urging developers to, you know, oil and gas has learned its lesson. They come bearing gifts, so again, an element of forgiveness. Definitely the last slide. Offshore developers cannot deliver innovative solutions required to reduce cost without the supply chain. New entrants are required, absolutely right across the supply chain. I'm quoting JFK here. I don't know if this is because I'm not so enamoured with the way American politics is going that I'm harking back to greater days, but anyway, one thing he talked about is economics has made us partners and necessity has made us allies. What unites us is far greater than what divides us. I think that's the same for oil and gas and wind. It's maybe a little bit happy clapping kumbaya, but I genuinely believe that, and it's about spreading the risk. You can satisfy both sectors. Again, as a reminder, I don't think offshore wind really can be considered the poor relation. in offshore wind anymore. It's a maturing industry in its own right and deserves that respect, is one thing I always like to say. Gaining a credible offshore wind track record can be one of your biggest challenges looking at this sector. So again, I would urge you to look at demonstration projects or smaller subcontract opportunities. Really can be very, very effective. Efforts and courage, back to JFK again, sorry. Efforts and courage are not enough without purpose and direction. So again, approach the offshore wind sector with a clear proposition, addressing the challenges which we've talked about before, promoting skills, innovation, competition. And that's me.
Well done, I managed to get through all that so quickly. Just to say that, as I say, the slides will be available, so there's a lot more depth on those slides that you can go through in the peace and quiet of your own offices when you get back. The organisers asked me just to talk a little bit about my organisation very briefly, just so that you can have an idea of what I'm doing here and some of the things that we're doing, in particularly the role of the special interest groups that I have within my organisation, and in particular the Offshore Wind special interest group we have. So my name's Simon Gray. I'm from the East of England Energy Group, acronym EEGR, as it's known. And EEGR, the East of England Energy Group, is the industry, business development and skills organisation for the East of England, for the supply chain and for the skills providers in the region. We're not for-profit, so this isn't a sales job for you. We're a not-for-profit industry-led group, and we're the energy sector lead for the local enterprise partnership in my neck of the woods, the East of England. And members operate right the way across the supply chain from EDF Energy, Shell, BP, right the way down to two-person metal bashers in a backstreet garage. And we focus on the raising of the profile of the industry as a whole, and we're all in energy, so we're across oil and gas, nuclear, and renewables. And we also try and grow the supply chain, grow the diverse skills range within our region and attract new investment into the region from external sources. And we also lobby government. One of the things that never ceases to amaze me is the lack of knowledge there is of our sector in Westminster. So our mission statement is to be the source of new opportunities and knowledge to enable member companies to strategically grow their businesses. So that's what we try and do. And as you can see, that gives you an idea of the diversity of the energy portfolio that I have in my neck of the woods. So we've got a super mature 50-year-old gas basin in the southern North Sea there. We have, along with that, a large gas terminal that services most of the south of England and beyond. We also have the opportunities for decommissioning in our region, which are vast. Decommissioning is worth some 70 billion is the latest figure that I heard on decommissioning. We have conventional generation, we have biogeneration, and really right the way across with Sizewell and potentially with Bradwell, we have some new build opportunities on the nuclear front. So it's a really diverse energy mix, arguably the most diverse energy mix anywhere in the UK. But we're here to talk about offshore wind. That gives you a very brief idea, and again, you have these slides after, kindly prepared for one of my members, 4C Offshore. If you haven't seen their website, it's worth going on that, 4C Offshore. They show all the different stages of the various wind farms that are already built, those that are being built, those that are still in the consenting phase. All of that information is on the 4C Offshore website, and it can be drilled right down into, and even down into which turbine manufacturers in that particular wind farm. And that's my neck of the woods, East of England. And as you can see, a lot of the activity, because of the shallow water, because of the strong winds, a lot of the activity is happening in that neck of the woods, which I'm delighted to say is the case. And I guess it goes right back to some of the early days. This was arguably one of the first, if not the first, offshore wind farm, dear old Scroby Sands, which we can see from the beach at Great Yarmouth. And would you believe this has actually become a visitor attraction in Great Yarmouth? We have a visitor centre there, and people love the wind farm there, unlike a certain Mr. Trump, shall we say. And Greater Gabbard, getting slightly larger now, 3.6 megawatt turbines, a little bit deeper water, a little bit further out, requiring a little bit more servicing. So now we have helicopters coming into play as well on these deeper waters. London Array, obviously again, we're looking there at 3.6 megawatt turbines, a part of round 2 back in 2012. Sheringham Shoal, again, similar sort of size there, round 2 again in 2012. And now we're looking at Dudgeon, one of the most recent wind farms to be commissioned, just in the process of being built off the North Norfolk coast there. Also Galloper, the extension to the Greater Gabbard wind farm, which is just going in as we speak as well. And then moving on to East Anglia 1, and we heard Jonathan Cole earlier this morning talking about this £2.5 billion investment in just the first part of the East Anglian array. I mentioned to you earlier, we have a number of special interest groups, or SIGs, as we call them. We have a late life and decommissioning SIG, that was one of our first. Being the first basin, the gas basin they had there 50 years ago, a lot of these platforms were put in, and when they were put in, no one thought how the hell we were going to get them back out again. So our decommissioning special interest group is highly active and was our first special interest group. And we've now seen a facility open up in Great Yarmouth specifically for decommissioning. We have a Southern North Sea Rejuvenation Special Interest Group. That's done in association with the authority, the Oil and Gas Authority. And that's looking at ways at how we can extend the life of that gas basin I mentioned to you earlier on. And indeed, it looks as though there may be significant reserves of gas, a much, much deeper layer in the Southern North Sea called carboniferous gas, if you want to go and Google that later on. And we also have on top of that our Marine Special Interest Group, which looks at all aspects of marine, from marine survey to marine life, and through to marine vessels as well, all within the energy sector and impacting upon the energy sector. And then most recently, our Offshore Wind Special Interest Group. Each one of these special interest groups, and I mention this to you because it was thought that some of you might like to take this as an exemplar to use in your own region. Each one of those we have partner organisations with, and each has their own terms of reference, which are reviewed on an annual basis. Each has a steering group that leads that particular special interest group. And they decide upon subjects for events, and they identify speakers for events to keep the supply chain informed of what's coming up on the horizon, is the idea. And one of the other things they came up with as well was producing a capability matrix for the region in each of these special interest groups. So typically we put out a call for nominations for the steering group applications, and that goes out. In this particular case for the offshore wind SIG, it was very heavily oversubscribed. We had about 4 times more people than we could actually take on board, and we had to go through a screening exercise to find and make sure we had no duplicates on the steering group. And applications had to go through quite a complicated and convoluted application basis to ensure that we had the right mix of people there. First meeting took place late last year with Graham Haycon from 3Sun as its chair. And there you see the terms of reference. Again, I'll leave you to look at the slides in the peace and quiet of your office later on. But quite interesting terms of reference, quite challenging. And again, what we tried to do there was try and pick some fairly low-hanging fruit in terms of work streams that would emanate from those terms of reference. And the work streams initially identified were 3 main ones: pre-construction, including projects in pre-planning, construction, and then operations and maintenance. And as I mentioned earlier, the group also agreed to establish a regional capability matrix. And this is where it might get a little bit complicated. I'm going to try and go online just to show you. So we produced an ink on paper version, first of all, a print version. So you had the companies down one side, and along the top, the different capabilities of those organizations was the idea. So that it was very quickly identify who could do what, and then see really as well, was there a gap at all? And also, where could those companies work together in specific bids as well? So I'm going to try and go live online. Let's see if the technology works. My God, it actually does. So, for instance, here we see a number of the companies. All the companies that are in the supply chain are listed there. And if I take one of those, let's say that the 3Sun group, they get a listing within that, which shows who they are, their address, their contact details, a map of where they're based, then onto a description of what they do, and then the actual capabilities and categories that they can undertake. So that was a very, very quick whistle-stop tour through that. And you can go online and see that for yourselves. And I did some screen grabs just in case we couldn't get online. So our special interest groups, the idea is it aligns the supply chain, it provides a gap analysis to see what's lacking from the local supply chain in each area, promotes the regional capabilities of your own region, identifies opportunities that may be available, provides a single point of contact for industry to contact the supply chain, and it also provides an opportunity for companies to collaborate and work together for a one-stop solution. And it's worth saying that Jonathan Cole from Scottish Power Renewables actually said when he came to our region, if EEEGR didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. So if you have something in your own region, then by all means do have a chat with me and we'll try and help you out in terms of sorting something similar for your own region. So ladies and gentlemen, we're now going on to a panel session, and I'm delighted to say we've been joined by two other panel members. Charlotte Taylor is Energy Specialist with Scottish Enterprise, and Bruce Clements is with us from Head of Sales with CWind. And talking about our previous presentation by Alan, I think CWind is an ideal example of a company that started off in just producing crew transfer vessels, has now diversified into being a full-service, both construction and ops and maintenance partner by working with other companies as well. And Charlotte's background is very much from the oil and gas sector, so we've got an interesting panel here with a number of wonderful opportunities for you to ask questions and probe their intelligence, ladies and gentlemen. So can I have any questions from the audience? If not, I will kick off with some. Okay, Dylan, can I ask you on lean wind, load-bearing capabilities on port infrastructure, that's been a fairly major issue in my region. What's that like nationally and in your neck of the woods?
Well, is this working? Yes.
Yep.
Okay. We were looking at various factors that would affect ports, and load-bearing capability was one that came up by the ports. I mean, this was going back several years, and they were finding that they were having to heavily reinforce their quaysides. As you, I think as you said earlier, this has been a really good opportunity for some of the local ports in the UK, I guess not just in the east, but across the UK, that have been that were looking for some extra lines of business and have found a real niche here, but they needed to make certain adjustments, and basically they've been doing, and so that's why you see it there, and you see it weighted the way it is. It was and in an extent it still is a problem if you are a port that is going to go into the industry, but it's not an insurmountable problem.
Any other issues on ports amongst the panel at all? One of the issues that I know that we faced is pressures within the fishing industry, for instance, where offshore wind can often be prepared to pay more than the indigenous local fishing industry for space within the port or a harbour. As a result of that, the fishing industry can feel somewhat pushed out, and we face some of those issues certainly in Lowestoft and Yarmouth. I don't know whether that's the case elsewhere as well.
Yes, I mean, when we did a mapping of, this was actually for a previous project, not the Lean Wind project, but we did a mapping of the stakeholder groups that could be affected by offshore wind, and again, the fishing community was one of the communities, stakeholder communities that could be affected by them. Again, it can be somewhat of a double-edged sword, because there's some evidence that these actually, some of the sites are turning into a bit of marine reserves and allowing fish stocks to recover. So there is that aspect that the fishing community would look at, or should look at too. But fortunately, in quite a few of the ports, as I said, there was some spare capacity, but obviously if you bring a new player in, then yes, it's going to reduce the capacity, push up prices, and I think that's what you're seeing. I don't think that you're unique in your region in seeing that.
Bruce, can I just ask you a little bit more about the CWind story? I've been to your premises a number of occasions and seen some of your superb vessels and been there to a couple of launches of your vessels. Can you tell us a little bit about CWind? Because you've gone very much from being a sort of regional player to being very much an international player, so identifying new markets.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Yes, we started off in 2009 on one port. It was an ex-fishing port called Brightlingsea. And we had one crew vessel and a set of techs, and we basically supplied services to Dong. From that, beginning in 2009, we've now been on 45 wind farms since last year. 50% of our turnover came from outside the UK. So we've completely diversified across and combining both CTV services, construction services, and O&M services. There's been a number of different factors. We've just been in the one renewable sector, but we've worked with lots of people that have come in from oil and gas, from fishing, from the military, and so forth. It's worth picking up on the fishing part because there's an employment aspect here where we brought in skippers from different aspects of the UK. They've come and they've worked with us. It isn't for everyone, but it's maybe another point. And if you go to Grimsby now, the O&M base is there, is basically the future for the town, and the fishing is really, unfortunately, isn't going to see what it ever was. So the other thing that is probably worth mentioning is I wrote down a number of different factors, Simon, for where we come from, if you'd like me to go through that. But one of them is for the supply chain is basically risk mitigation. So if you're coming into the industry, one of the first things you'll get asked by all the developers is, what's your health and safety record? That's one of the critical factors now. One of the second factors that will come out will be, okay, how can you mitigate the risk in terms of areas such as balance sheet strength and things like that. So the other thing is if you've got an oil and gas background and you've got a demonstrable capability in particular areas, that is fantastic. And I think it was mentioned by Alan, you mentioned about the proposition. Those propositions that have been working in oil and gas will work just as well in the renewable sector. There was a mention earlier about innovation, and innovation has been sort of important coming through. We're seeing the supply chain change very, very rapidly. I think a lot more innovation needs to happen in order for the cost reductions to achieve. But a request from the supply chain is that if you want us to take more innovation on, the packages of work that need to come out for the developers need to be bigger, basically. So,
thank you for that.
Shall I finish there, Simon, for now?
Sorry?
Enough for now.
Enough for now. What I will do, though, is what I'd like to do is just turn to Charlotte very briefly as well. Charlotte, we heard earlier on about some of the opportunities for the oil and gas supply chain. I'm just wondering what you've identified so far within your role at Scottish Enterprise.
Yes, so my role at Scottish Enterprise is helping our oil and gas companies in Scotland to look at the different opportunities within the renewable sector and elsewhere to diversify. I missed, unfortunately, the plenary session this morning, but I gather that the First Minister reiterated the point this morning that we're moving into a new energy landscape, but we've got extensive experience within our oil and gas sector, and as well as continuing to maximise efficient recovery of oil and gas, we want to use that expertise. So that's why we're building a programme of work to try and help our companies do that. As my colleagues have mentioned, there are some cultural challenges and some challenges in terms of methods of contracting and health and safety specifics that mean that a transition from oil and gas to offshore wind may not be without its challenges. And so we're partnering with Opportunity North East to look at what we can do to support companies. Out of about 2,000 companies in the oil and gas supply chain in Scotland, something like over 90% of those are SMEs, and they are likely to be companies that are more reliant on a single market. So while the times have been good and people have been making hay, they haven't needed to look at building business resilience by looking at alternative markets. But that's definitely changed now. Those SMEs are likely to have been more reliant on single markets than some of the larger companies. And some research we did in 2014 certainly bears that out. But things are definitely changing, and looking at, for instance, DNV do an annual outlook report for the oil and gas sector. And in 2016, if you look at that document, there were no references to renewables and no references to diversification. In the 2017 report, it noted that 50% of the large global companies that it surveys were looking at diversifying more in 2017, and 28% of those were expecting to invest more in renewables in the coming year. So there's obviously a change, there's more interest in coming into the sector, and we're looking at the things that we can do to help support that, not just in offshore wind. Offshore wind we've been running a program of support, of one-to-one support providing to companies looking to get into offshore wind for some time. That's been very successful. But we do see, as we've noted in some of the other presentations, we still need to work on offshore wind cost competitiveness in Scotland. We need to still keep working to achieve the cost reductions that are forecast to happen. Those haven't materialised yet. There's still work to do. Collaboration is going to be important in achieving those, as is innovation. Alan mentioned 43 new innovations can happen. The oil and gas company's been through a period of having to cut costs. They're experiencing that and doing well in achieving that, and it's an inherently innovative sector. So clearly there's a lot of synergies there. But we're also we're putting out some research to look at different areas in heat, which is a big factor in the Scottish energy strategy, to look at what the opportunities are for oil and gas companies there, and also water and energy storage and systems, which is an area that Scotland are doing some great things in. I'm conscious that I've covered a lot of different ground, and
I'll turn back to the floor, and I think John Best down here had a question.
Yeah, thank you, John Best from James Fisher. A question and an observation, really. Thanks for a great presentation, Simon, and picking up on Bruce's point about innovation. Innovation is not just about changing the way we do things with bits of machinery and equipment. It's also about commercial behaviours, and Alan's point absolutely demonstrated that. So really, I think your presentation was extremely open, and it showed how the opportunities physically for doing this stuff is in the east of England, but the supply chain is in the whole of the UK. And so I'd actually ask the panel how they can help to encourage people to work together within the UK and be closer to where the action's going to be. You know, Aberdeen, Glasgow, Barrow, Humber, you're welcome. It's an open invitation, I believe, and there's plenty of people who want to work with you in the east of England.
Good point, well made. And I think, yes, we need more facilitation in that area. I think the danger is that we compartmentalise and put things into bunkers, and oil and gas won't speak to renewables, and renewables won't speak to oil and gas, and we won't speak to nuclear, and so on and so forth. I think that is a major issue. I think one of the more encouraging things is that I know within our rejuvenation special interest group, the Oil and Gas Authority are actively looking at how one of the work streams is actually how can renewables and oil and gas work together, and such things as gas-to-wire technology, which is taking either small pocket gas or stranded gas or depleted gas wells, and using that to generate electricity from a gas turbine out on a platform and export that electricity to your nearest wind farm at times when it's not windy, with the kind of things that's being considered. So there's some quite innovative ideas there. I don't know whether BVG have got anything on that side at all in terms of other areas in which they can work together.
I think just to pick up on your, sorry, I'm loud there, sorry. Pick up on your point there. I think, you know, you heard me talking about O&M being the great white hope, as it were. And I think, to answer your question, I think it's also on the supply chain as well to come up, because again, I think if you look at the choice developers are going to have at the moment when they put their turbine in, guys like Siemens, whatever, do the maintenance for the 5-year period, at the end of that, there comes a chance whereby the end of the warranty period, I think it's up for the supply chain to come together collaboratively and offer an alternative to someone like Siemens continuing with the O&M or some of these MHI Vestas, etc. So I think guys like James Fisher, CWind, 3Sun, these are the types of companies that are trailblazing, if you like, and I think there needs to be a lot more working together, collaborating with these types of companies that have already done it. And if I can just add, I've spent a lot of time recently up in Norway, for example. And again, when I go up there, I'm so impressed with, they've put a lot of money behind it, don't get me wrong, but they have what this global centre of excellence concept. That's what I was talking about earlier. They don't talk about oil and gas or offshore wind. It's very much, you know, localised in each of the regions, very similar to maybe EEEGR, etc. But a lot of money there that people actually come together, and collaboration is absolutely, there's money put into it. There's a political will for it. There's a supply chain will for it. So again, as much as I think the Scottish enterprises, etc. of the world have a role to play in doing this, I think it's on the supply chain to come up with the compelling alternatives when it comes to things like O&M.
One more just to throw in. Can I throw you all a real googly here, which is one of the things that the supply chain has been relying upon and trying to utilise as a lever is UK content, and the issue of UK content, the aspirational 50% UK content. A number of points here. First of all, my first point is, isn't it true to say that actually just via ops and maintenance you're going to reach the 50% UK content? So actually the amount of content in the actual construction phase is minimal. But as we've said, O&M is the goal, is the nirvana that we're all working for. My question is that post-Brexit, are we going to see far more teeth coming into that in terms of UK content, do you think?
I mean, I think, you know, you can talk about the specifics of what will happen post-Brexit and how that will affect the pressure from government in terms of content. But what we're trying to do in Scotland is to make sure that our Scottish supply chain companies are able to win bids by looking at their competitiveness based on cost. And so regardless of that lever, which is something that can be played to the benefit of the local supply chain, really getting to the bottom of what's enabling companies to bid and to win contracts based on their cost competitiveness is the key to increasing local content.
Anyone else?
I guess I'm apolitical, so I can give an opinion.
I think you mentioned something about the American president when you say you're apolitical earlier on.
Yeah, apolitical here, yeah. The short answer is I don't know what Brexit's going to affect. However, I can't help thinking that it can't be a good thing. Right. I think the whole success of offshore wind has been, it is a pan-European business. There are collaborations, there's, you know, people from all over. I think by the UK being outside of that, I think for renewables it's probably going to put a spanner in the works. Again, you'll not get a developer to give you an opinion on that at the moment because, you know, no one knows, but it doesn't feel as if it's not in keeping with where the direction of travel is collaboration, working together, innovation. I don't feel Brexit supports that.
David, from a operator's perspective, no comments or what?
That was the bogey word that we're not going to talk about was Brexit. I think it is going to be an impact, but as Alan says, I really don't know where it's going to go. I would say that in Scotland, maybe there's so many variables. I deal with too many variables to start bringing Brexit into it as well. But you know, how we operate in a European market, how, you know, there could be political events in Scotland that could take that a little bit further as well. A lot of the components that we're talking about do come from Europe, so there's the potential for cost to escalate. Yeah. And also, in my personal opinion, that if we get down to local supply and the right for local supply and stuff like that, it might breed some bad behaviour there as well. That there's a right to local supply, whereas it should be you're competitive and use your competitive advantage of being close to site, etc., and various other aspects like that.
And Bruce, you said what, 50% of your business now non-UK?
Yes, it's 50%.
So have you?
Yeah, it's about 35% of our operation centres are now outside the UK.
So have you dropped your income budget within your forecast?
Okay, so it all affects, but I was actually going to give a different view. If you look at the outturn for the next 10, 20 years' time, we're going to see the US, we're going to see the Far East take up. So we can either we don't know how these different problems are going to play out. but we do have some expertise within this country that can go to those places, and we can drive that expertise into those places, Brexit or no Brexit. And I think that's an opportunity to basically take with both hands. Certainly Taiwan and the US, we're just on the cusp. If you listen to, there was a Danish inventor of the turbine, Henrik Steindal, gave a fascinating perspective of how the industry has come about over the last 20 years. We're just on the cusp of maybe how we massively industrialize. And how we massively industrialize might actually change the whole economics. So from the supply chain point of view, for the UK, if we could have a cross-UK cluster of companies able to work together to drive that industrialization, taking a CWind hat off here, that would be fantastic, and we could then look at those other markets. The US and China, Taiwan, Japan, Korea, all looking at offshore wind space. And as the costs come down and we're looking at subsidy-free wind farms now, that has to be a really interesting place to look at.
Yeah, I mean, I've had sort of 2 or 3 delegations of people coming over from the US recently to look at my neck of the woods. And there isn't a single sizable cable manufacturer in the States. So they're going to have to import cables either from Europe or from the Far East. And the reliability of cables, debatably, from the Far East is not as great as that as in Europe. So Europe stands a good opportunity there, subject to some of the limitations that there are in the USA, like the Jones Act. And I know that I think we can see Stuart Thornton up the back there had some experience of that with jack-up vessels going out to the USA and some of the protectionism that there is in the States. But nonetheless, the States are open for business and want us to go out there and do business with them. They're very, very keen to attract UK companies and European companies out to the States. And I think
just one very quick point to add. You know, I'm not going to say this is a benefit of coming out of Brexit, but I think one thing that is probably a source of frustration for people in the room here is I think quite often UK supply chain is competing against a European supply chain that is actually fully or partially state-owned or state-funded. And again, what might come through a Brexit is a little bit of fairness on that. Again, I think a lot of the European companies play the export tax credit game a lot better than the UK. So I'm not saying Brexit's a good thing, but in a lot of cases, UK suppliers are up against, you know, as I say, part state-owned Spanish, you know, I personally don't think that's fair. So what may come out of the Brexit is a sharpening up on what support, you know, a level playing field for UK companies competing against companies that aren't being backed up by state-owned money.
Yeah, and your point earlier on, Bruce, about industrialisation, I think industrialisation of things like jacket manufacturing, I think it must be key to driving cost down. From BVG's perspective, have we actually seen, are the operators trying to force cost reductions from the supply chain to the extent where the supply chain is squeaking now, or?
Oh, I think, you know, as I said in my slides, it'd be disingenuous for me to say that there's not a bit of thumb screws being applied in terms of taking the cost down. It absolutely is. You know, there's no way we're going to take out 40% cost in the next sort of 10 years unless people, you know, take a bit of cost out. However, as Dave mentioned as well, you know, there's a lot of competition, there's a lot of wind farms on Europe, etc. You know, there may be a tipping point that developers, etc., cannot be too hard, that they will come to a point where there is a shortage of suppliers, and, you know, you play the hardball too much, you're not going to be left with a supply chain. So I very much think it's a balancing act. But yeah, a lot of it will come through, you know, new types of foundations, suction buckets, new types of suction buckets, different ways to manufacture them at scale. So again, you know, that is taking cost out, but it's not necessarily saying to the supply chain, that's, you know, I want you to half your margin. Yeah. But, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say you're not going to get the thumb screws applied. It is very, very competitive out there. But I think there will come a tipping point.
So any other questions from the floor? There's one in the gentleman in the middle there. That's possibly the white shirt there. Can you say your name and your company and who your question's for?
Yep. My name is Christian Petrick. I work for the IEA RTD. And the question is rather to the entire panel. And it's with regards to the discussion that we had a little bit before on the oil and gas sector. Because I'm wondering, we had this in the previous session, that it was clear if we want to reach the Paris Agreement targets of staying below or even 1.5 degrees Celsius, then the oil and gas sector basically has in the midterm already not really the big future that they were hoping for, I guess. And I'm a little bit surprised about the discussion that offshore wind should, there should be a lot of collaboration with oil and gas. That's maybe fine for a moment, but I think it's not fair to say, or it's, I don't really understand the strategy to say we still have to promote the oil and gas sector, because in theory the sector doesn't have a future if we want to be by 2050 more or less zero carbon. So I don't understand why, well, I understand that there are a lot of jobs here in Scotland depending on oil and gas, but it's, I think, not giving the right message to say you will be there for forever. I think there are a lot of opportunities that we have in offshore wind, so why not be honest and say move over and really invest in offshore renewables and in marine renewables, instead of still trying to keep this old oil and gas sector up and running.
Old oil and gas sector, how about that? I thought you might like to respond on that one, yes.
Well, your point in essence, if you take things to their extremity, is obviously the case. We know that the energy landscape is in transition. We're decarbonising our energy system. And obviously, that means a diminishing in the role for oil and gas within that system. However, that is over a period of time. Clearly, there is still much to be gained from efficiently maximising recovery from current oil and gas. There's also a great market, you might not think of it as diversification, but for companies in decommissioning. Yeah. And that's expertise that will be transferable to an international market. So what Scotland can do in the short term in doing that decommissioning work and building up expertise is something that can then be exported. But within that transition, what we are saying to oil and gas companies is that in order to build resilience within their businesses, they should look at the opportunities that we think are many in offshore wind. We've all spoken about the extent to which the offshore wind market is growing, but we think there are other potential markets. We're, as I said, doing some research at the moment into what the opportunities are for oil and gas companies in heat, in water, in energy systems, and potentially in hydrogen. We are running a workshop in June to look at opportunities for collaboration between the marine energy sector, so the wave and tidal sector, with oil and gas companies. And as Alan mentioned earlier, really trying to drive those companies to come up with ideas for where there can be collaborations without us hand-holding too much. So in essence, I think you have a good point, which is well made, but we are looking at that transition, and we're doing the work we're doing at the moment to help in that transition and to make sure that our companies in Scotland are resilient.
Anyone else want to take that one on?
I think just to add, again, I would agree with some of what you say, but I think if you look at the energy demand at the moment, I think domestic power, for example, completely agree. Scotland's producing 100% of its domestic power through green energy, but things like transport, for example, there's no way we can just cut the legs off oil and gas. Europe is just not ready. We're an oil and gas transport economy. That's going to take several years to change that around. So again, whilst I agree with the sentiment of what you're saying, is I think things like transport, we're not green, we're not moving over to kind of renewable energy yet, and I think that's going to take a bit of time. So I'd agree with what you're saying, but it can't just be, stop now, pile into renewables. I think there's things like domestic heat, industrial power and transport that are still going to rely on an energy source like oil and gas in the short term.
Yeah, as an all-energy membership organisation, it would be me being like a turkey voting for Christmas if I were to say that we should stop producing oil and gas. I think the other main point here is actually we're still going to need certainly gas and oil for vehicles, but gas for some while for generation, because we're decommissioning a lot of our nuclear fleet and our offshore wind fleet isn't in place yet. So I think for the next 10, 20, 30 years, we're still going to be burning gas to produce electricity for some good long while yet. But that's if it's indigenous gas, I would say that's comparatively green solution. If we're burning LNG that's imported from all over the world, then yeah, clearly that's not a very green solution. Absolutely. Well, we've just about run out of time, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all so much for your contributions. Can I ask you to thank our panel?